I follow a lot of progressive Christians, ex-evangelicals, people who in general talk about religion on YouTube and other platforms. And a lot of them are talking about a more nuanced and informed sexual ethic, which I think is good. A lot of them are talking about how purity culture is stupid and that you shouldn't tell impressionable teenagers that they're like chewed pieces of gum or roses with all the petals plucked off if they've done certain sexual activities outside of marriage. And I think it's good too. But there's also an aspect that I really don't like, that a lot of even very progressive YouTubers tend to fall into. And this is making a very sharp distinction between purity culture, which is saying that you're damaged by any kind of sexual activity, and having a blanket prohibition against sex outside of marriage. People tend to view those two like they're very distinct things, and I think they're all on a spectrum of badness that is purity culture. A lot of times I'll hear a YouTuber say, well, why can't they just have a rule against sex outside of marriage? Why can't they just do that and then stop? And then, okay, maybe I don't agree with that, but at least it's not as bad. Like, why can't they just stop there? Why do they have to do all the rose petals and the no holding hands and the no kissing and the no going on dates without a chaperone stuff? Like, that's so obviously wrong and unnecessary. Why can't they just tell people not to have sex? And I'm like, well, you can't. You can't make that blanket prohibition without having a lot of other rules to enforce it. If you start there, if you start cannot do X before Y for everyone, everywhere, then in order to keep people doing that and hitting that arbitrary standard, you're going to need to have all these other rules too to keep them in line. I would say the essence of purity culture is introducing this legalism into sexual ethics, and only into sexual ethics. Essentially, purity culture is anything that says, do not do X before Y. And honestly, you could tell people, don't touch your big toes before you're married. And if you've made that a big enough deal, like if you said that particularly is sin in some nebulous way that no one can quite agree on how, you would still have people freaking out about whether or not their big toes are touching just because you told them to worry about that. It's not that I don't think there are any rules for sexual relationships. I think there definitely are, but I would say they boil down to, is it consensual? Is it safe? Is it kind? Which are essentially the rules for every human relationship across the board, whether sex is involved or not. And they are pretty clear when you're actually in the situation, considering what's best for you and what's best for everyone involved. But they're very hard to put into a never do X before Y format, because what one person wants might be very different from what another person wants. What might be very kind and caring to one person might be incredibly mean to another person. And I can't answer what is kind, what is safe, what is consensual for someone else, because I don't know your situation. You kind of need to figure that out, and you kind of need to explore and try to figure out what you want. Do I want to kiss someone on the first date? Maybe I'm not comfortable with that. Maybe I have to do it once and then realize, like too much physical contact too soon does not work for me. And that doesn't make you damaged. It doesn't make you sinful, but it's also something that is hard to phrase as a rule that works across the board for everyone. I don't think you can just tell people, okay, just don't have the sex. Just get married before you have the sex and leave it at that. Because a lot of people kind of want to have sex. So they're always going to have to be asking themselves, well, did the hand holding lead to sex? Maybe no, but the dates, like, is this too much contact? Am I being tempted? They're always going to have to be asking themselves that and second guessing themselves. To me, saying, well, why can't you just tell them not to have sex before marriage? Why can't you just leave it at that? To me, it's like telling people, well, why can't you just stay under 125 pounds? Why do you have to be calorie counting? Why do you have to have all these weird rituals about food? Why do you have to be forcing yourself to throw up after every meal? Why do you have to be restricting yourself and starving yourself every day? I just don't get it. Just stay under 125 pounds. That's simple. Just don't do all that extra stuff. But not everyone is supposed to be under 125 pounds. It's a completely arbitrary number that might be extremely easy for some people and completely unrealistic for other people. Because once you introduce legalism in anything, you're really cutting off people's ability to rely on their own intuition and rely on their own sense of what's practical in their situation. They're going to need the extra rules to guide them. Just like the person who's trying to be under 125 pounds can't just eat healthy food, because eating healthy food might not get them to that place if they're like naturally a person who is over that weight. Because they're not going to be able to assess, am I hungry? Am I not hungry? What do I think I should be eating? Am I eating too little? Am I eating too much? They're going to have to be like, well, is this salad going to get me closer to 125 pounds or further away from 125 pounds? Well, I can't risk it. If it's sin, even if it's sin in some nebulous way that no one's going to really define, then I can't risk getting too close to being fat. Or like I can't risk, if it's a sexual relationship, I can't risk getting too close to maybe having sex, because that's sin. You can try doing both, but I think it's like trying to be under the arbitrary weight and also eating intuitively. It might work great if you're a naturally small person like me. Like I would have to overeat so much to even get close to 120 pounds. So I would probably be fine. I would probably be that person being like, yeah, just do what feels right. It's not so hard. But for other people, they probably wouldn't be able to hit that weight or even get close unless they do some really damaging things and they don't eat healthy for their body type. I think in the same way, when you're talking about a sexual relationship, you can try to hit a standard of don't hold hands before you're engaged. And you can also try to have a healthy relationship, but chances are those two things may not line up, and you're going to have to ditch healthy relationship for meeting the arbitrary standard if you believe that not meeting it is going to be sinful. And I'm speaking as someone who really did not grow up with purity culture, who always went to fairly loose churches where dating was allowed. It was still messed up, and I don't know, I can't judge whether one is more messed up than the other. I think really hardline purity culture is worse, but soft purity culture is still pretty bad. You know, I was in my 20s attending church and dating someone, and everybody was all up in my business. Very much, not too much PDA in public. Are you going on that trip overnight with that person who is of age and you're both working and it ain't none of our business, but somehow it is, because Jesus, are you having separate rooms? Are you going to be tempted? Even just recently, one of my dear friends was congratulating me for not letting a boyfriend sleep at my place because we might be tempted as 30-year-olds. We're grown adults. Like, do you know what you sound like? You sound so immature. And I couldn't tell her that because I didn't want to lose her friendship and shock her, because purity culture messes everything up. But it sure does sound stupid where you're so concerned about what body parts of grown adults are not touching other body parts of grown adults. It just really gets quite silly the more you think about it. So I get that progressive Christians are kind of trying to compromise by coming out very anti-purity culture, but being a little bit more tolerant of people having rules about who can have sex when. But I honestly think you can't divide those things. They go together. If you start really caring about other people's sex lives, then you're gonna have all these weird rules. So anyway, that's my opinion on purity culture. I hope that made sense. Thank you for listening.